year is 1963. Romanian President Gheorghe Gheorghiu Dej and Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito sign an agreement on the construction of the Đerdap hydroelectric power plant. Called a marvel of engineering and a project ahead of its time the region has never seen, it has been declared a national interest of both countries. Some sources claim that more than 5,000 workers were engaged in its construction. More than 3 million cubic meters of concrete were used, more than 160,000 tons of steel, and more than 60,000 tons of equipment. Although it seemed to many that this was a matter around which everyone spontaneously gathered, the truth is different. It was a workers' movement that brought together young and old, the army and the police, workers and students, all gathered under one banner of progress. Many claim that it was the golden age of Yugoslavia and that no one was hungry, but how much was their sacrifice really worth? Beneath that glow of progress, through the concrete and steel, through the songs of the workers and the laughter of the youth, something was disappearing that no one could see at the time. That's why I have to ask you a question. Was progress ever really worth that much? Because right there, on the banks of the Danube, begins the story that most people don't want to know.
The 1960s were an era of division and fear. The world was divided in two by an iron curtain that divided people's hearts as much as it divided geographical maps. On one side were Washington and its promises of freedom, on the other, Moscow and its iron discipline. Between them lay a world in constant fear of nuclear war, where one wrong move could mean disaster. In this harsh world, in the Balkans, there was a state that refused to lean towards the east or the west. Yugoslavia, an area that included Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. This was a state that was ruled by a person who carried in himself the qualities of a revolutionary and a ruler. This was a person whose name was known far beyond the borders of the Balkans. From an illiterate apprentice locksmith to a guerrilla fighter in the service of Austria-Hungary, to a politician who met with Nixon, Kennedy, and Queen Elizabeth. Tito was an enigma in his own right. His story is a legend believed by millions, an illusion turned into reality, a person who dared to say no to Stalin, but talk to Khrushchev, a person who signed treaties with Moscow, but drank whiskey with Westerners. For his people, he was a symbol of strength, determination, and independence. His face was on the walls of schools and factories, in calendars and homes, on flags carried by pioneers. His name was called with the same assurance as a prayer. Yugoslavia at that time was a country on the rise, a country that was turning its dreams into concrete, the country that created an architectural revolution by building a new Belgrade, the country that created factories and ironworks out of nothing, a utopia that believed it could create something that neither East nor West had been able to create, its own way. A world looking for aggressive leaders found something else in Yugoslavia, a picture of a people gathered around one person, one symbol, one idea, in a voluntary way. At that moment, Josip Broz Tito became history.
Neko vreme se bilo stalno mišljenje, komunisti sada, demokratija, decentralizacija i sada oni nemaju više tako ni pravo, ani dužnost da moraju da odgovaraju za razvoj, unutrašnji razvoj naše zemlje. To je pogrešno. Ponovno mi moramo stati na to da komunisti odgovaraju za razvitak socijalizma, a ko će drugi ako ne komunisti?
After the end of the World War II, Yugoslavia entered a period of rapid transformation. A country devastated by war was attempting to build a new order, a new economy, and a new vision of the future. In the years that followed, the Communist Party gradually consolidated its influence, extending into every sphere of society. If Yugoslavia were to be reduced to 3 men, they would be Josip Broz Tito, the supreme commander and a figure who, over time, transcended the boundaries of politics to become the symbol of an entire era, Edvard Kardel, one of the most important figures of socialist Yugoslavia, and arguably the most significant ideologue of the system after Tito, and Alexander Ranković, one of the most powerful and controversial men in socialist Yugoslavia. Within the system, he was known as the man of the security apparatus, control, and party discipline. During the World War II, he became one of Tito's closest associates. After the war, his influence grew rapidly, and he emerged as a key figure in the creation of OZNA and later UDBA, the agencies that formed the foundation of the new Yugoslavia's security system. During those years, Yugoslavia lived with the conviction that the future could be built with its own hands. Factories, steel mills, highways, and entire cities were being constructed. Newspapers reported daily on progress, industrial growth, and major state projects. Cameras captured youth work actions, columns of workers, and vast construction sites that gave the impression that the entire Balkan region was changing before the eyes of a single generation. Yet among all these projects, one gradually began to stand apart. On the very border between Yugoslavia and Romania, in the heart of the Đerdap, the idea emerged to build a hydroelectric power plant unlike anything this part of Europe had ever seen. The construction agreement was signed in 1963 by Josip Broz Tito and Romanian leader George Georgiou Dej. In a world divided by Cold War blocs, the cooperation of 2 states on a project of such magnitude was presented as proof of political stability, strength, and technological progress. But the Danube at the Đerdap was no ordinary river. It carved its way through the massive rocks of the gorge, deep, powerful, and unpredictable. For centuries, it had shaped the landscape around it, cutting its course through mountains and leaving the impression of a natural force that mankind could only observe. The communists, however, envisioned a different relationship. The river would be stopped, its power would be tamed. The Danube would become a source of energy for the entire state. From the very first stages of construction, it was clear that the Iron Gates project exceeded the scope of an ordinary power plant. Machinery, concrete, and steel arrived at the site in quantities that seemed almost unimaginable for the time. Thousands of workers labored in shifts that continued day and night. Massive structures gradually began to rise above the riverbanks, while the entire area along the Danube took on the appearance of an industrial zone unlike anything that had ever existed in that part of the Balkans. Newspapers wrote about the Iron Gates project almost every day. Posters depicted strong workers, massive concrete structures, and a river gradually being brought under human control. Documentary footage captured youth work brigades and the faces of people who believed they were taking part in the creation of something that would change the history of an entire nation. To the average person of that era, it seemed as though the whole country was moving in a single direction. But when something so immense is being built, the question is not only what is being created, the question is also what is disappearing. As construction progressed, the level of the Danube gradually began to change. Riverbanks that had remained unchanged for generations slowly vanished, and settlements along the river entered the future flood zone. A landscape that had been part of everyday life for centuries began to transform faster than ever before. Villages along the Danube were left deserted. People abandoned the homes in which they had been born. Courtyards, fields, roads, and cemeteries were slowly left behind. It is estimated that the construction of the Iron Gates project displaced tens of thousands of people on both sides of the river. Some received new houses or apartments, others new land, but the place they were leaving behind could never truly be replaced. At the time, no one could have imagined that beneath that very landscape lay something far older, something that would change the way we view Europe's past. In 1965, during archaeological surveys initiated because of the Iron Gates project, archaeologist Dragoslav Srejović made a discovery that would soon become one of the most significant in European prehistory. Near present-day Donji Milanovec, beneath layers of soil, the remains of an ancient settlement began to emerge. At first, the site appeared no different from the many archaeological locations discovered across the Balkans. But as the excavations progressed, archaeologists increasingly realized that what stood before them was not merely another prehistoric settlement. Slowly rising from the earth was an entire civilization whose existence had remained hidden for centuries beneath the layers of time, at a place that would soon disappear beneath the waters. Layer by layer, a world emerged before the eyes of researchers, a world belonging to a period far older than most of the civilizations we today regard as the cradles of human history. For decades, textbooks on European civilization had been written around the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Yet on the banks of the Danube, a site was coming to light that challenged many long-standing assumptions about prehistory. What was uncovered bore little resemblance to the conventional image of prehistoric communities. The houses were arranged according to a clear plan. Their foundations had a distinctive trapezoidal shape, and each was oriented toward the Danube, as if the entire community lived in a constant relationship with the river. The floors were made of a hardened reddish limestone mixture, while at the very center of each house stood a hearth positioned with almost mathematical precision. For the inhabitants of Lepenski Vir, the hearth was the center of the home and the focal point around which the life of the entire family was organized. For years, some researchers have pointed to the possibility that the architecture of these houses carried a deeper symbolic meaning as well. The interior space was arranged in such a way that light penetrated toward the central part of the dwelling, while the hearth and internal layout created the impression that the house served not only as a place of residence, but also as a space for ritual, family identity, and spiritual life. Directly across the Danube from Lepenski Vir rises Mount Treskovac, whose silhouette bears a striking resemblance to the geometry of the houses themselves. This prominent landmark dominated the horizon that the inhabitants of the settlement observed every day. In later years, some researchers attempted to determine whether a connection existed between the position of the settlement, the rising of the sun, and Mount Treskovac itself. Although different interpretations of these theories still exist today, one fact remains clear. The entire architectural design of Lepenski Vir demonstrated an exceptional understanding of space, natural cycles, and the environment in which it was created. As the excavations progressed, stone sculptures began to emerge from the earth. Sculptures that would soon become the defining symbol of the entire site. Archaeologists were confronted with scenes no one had expected. Massive faces with deeply carved eyes, pronounced cheekbones, broad mouths, and a striking blend of human and fish-like features appeared as though they belonged to a long-forgotten world. Until that moment, no culture in Europe was known to have produced such a sophisticated and distinctive artistic expression at such an early stage of human history. When the inhabitants of Lepenski Vir were shaping these sculptures, the pyramids of Giza did not yet exist. Stonehenge had not been erected. The great civilizations of Mesopotamia lay thousands of years in the future. The world we now call ancient had yet to be born. Many of these sculptures were discovered directly beside the hearths, at the very center of the houses. They appeared to be an integral part of everyday life, a presence that held profound spiritual significance for the inhabitants of the settlement. Some researchers have drawn parallels between this practice and the modern tradition of venerating a family patron saint, known among Serbs today as the Slava. Interestingly, the motif of fish and water-associated beings appears again thousands of years later in other great civilizations. In ancient Sumer, Enki was regarded as the lord of water, wisdom, and knowledge. Mesopotamian traditions also speak of Oannes, a mysterious figure who emerged from the sea to teach humanity laws, construction, and civilization. In many ancient traditions, water represented the source of life, memory, and knowledge. Whether the inhabitants of Lepenski Vir viewed the Danube in a similar way is something we cannot know with certainty today. What remains undeniable, however, is that some of the most mysterious and sophisticated sculptures of European prehistory were created on its banks. Sculptures that, even after thousands of years, we have not been able to fully explain. Equally fascinating was the daily life of its inhabitants. Archaeologists uncovered vast quantities of fish bones, particularly those of the beluga sturgeon, one of the largest freshwater fish species in Europe. They also discovered bone hooks, net weights, tools made of stone, antler, and bone, as well as numerous traces of material processing and craftsmanship. Everything pointed to a society that had, over centuries, developed specialized knowledge of the river, its migrations, fish movements, and seasonal cycles. This no longer resembled the image of primitive hunting groups occasionally stopping along the riverbank. It resembled an organized community with its own system of knowledge, traditions, and culture. Even more unusual were their burial practices. At several locations, human remains were found beneath the thresholds of houses. Some individuals had been buried in specific yoga-like positions, forming a trapezoidal shape. For the inhabitants of Lepenski Vir, the symbolism of the trapezoid appears to have represented far more than a simple belief. It seemed as though the living and the dead shared the same space, the same hearth, the same house, the same memory. For the people of Lepenski Vir, death did not necessarily represent an end. It was part of a cycle that continued through family, ancestors, and community. The longer the excavations continued, the clearer it became that Lepenski Vir was part of a much broader cultural horizon that had been developing in the Serbia for millennia. Certain archaeological layers and discoveries from the wider region indicate human presence dating back more than 10,000 years, placing this area among the oldest continuously inhabited regions in Europe. It is precisely for this reason that the discovery of Lepenski Vir posed a problem for the communist regime. Whenever archaeology uncovers something of this magnitude, a fundamental question emerges. How much do we actually not know about the past? How incomplete were our assumptions about the origins of European civilization? Perhaps that is why another question is equally intriguing. How is it possible that even today Lepenski Vir receives incomparably less attention than Egypt, Stonehenge, or Sumer? Would its place in world history be different if it had not been discovered in the Serbia, but somewhere within a region that remained at the center of Western historical attention for decades? It is here that the entire story takes on a new meaning. While machines were building the future, a past was emerging beneath them, one that challenged not only the landscape itself, but also long-held assumptions about where the earliest centers of human culture were located. There is something almost ironic in the fact that Lepenski Vir was discovered precisely because of the construction of the Iron Gates project. Had it not been for the construction works and the accompanying archaeological surveys, it is possible that the site would never have been discovered in time. Yet at the very same moment, that very project threatened to submerge it forever. There is a question that remains open even today. If a civilization of such importance was discovered practically at the last moment, how much more is left under the Danube? Before the discovery of Lepenski Vir, there were individual findings and indications that there are traces of much older cultures along the coast. The Đerdap Gorge has never been an archaeologically insignificant area, but at a time when the entire state apparatus was directed towards the construction of a project of national importance, archaeology could not slow down the industry. A decision was made to move the Lepenski Vir to a higher altitude in order to save it from the rising water. A complex process of dismantling the site followed. Individual parts were carefully cut, transported, and reassembled at the new location. A huge number of artifacts were saved, but the question that was left hanging in the air was much deeper. Is it possible to move history and keep it the same? In archaeology, the context is often as important as the object itself. The position of the houses, the layers of the earth, the orientation towards the river, and the space in which the culture was created represent a part of the story that cannot be completely relocated. In the end, the water still won. What the archaeologists failed to explore in time disappeared beneath the surface of the newly formed lake. Old settlements have disappeared from the map. The banks that watched over the Danube for thousands of years lost their original shape. The space that was a home for generations became part of a completely new landscape. At the same time, the hydroelectric power plant was completed. The turbines are started. Electricity began to reach factories, cities, and homes throughout Yugoslavia. What was presented as a dream for years has become a reality. Đerdap fulfilled its purpose. It produced energy, started the industry. It became one of the symbols of the modernization of the entire country. But while one story was over, another was just beginning. Unlike concrete, steel, and turbines whose task was clear, the questions opened by Lepenski Vir could not be closed so easily. As the years passed, archaeologists realized more and more that the discovery in the Đerdap Gorge raised a number of new questions about the origins of European cultures, about the earliest forms of organized life, and about the role that the area of Serbia had in the continent's oldest past. Below the surface of the lake remained a space that no one could explore. A space filled with possibilities and a distant past that, although within reach, remains forever behind us. Today, Lepenski Vir is under protection. Its houses, sculptures, and artifacts represent one of the most important archaeological sites in Europe. Part of the original site still lies underwater unexplored, as well as who knows how many other traces of the past that we never got to see. Today, when we look at the calm surface of the Danube, it is hard to imagine that beneath it there are submerged settlements, roads, courtyards, and the remains of thousands of years old civilizations. The river seems quiet now, almost calm, but beneath that surface lies a space that has changed the modern world forever. Perhaps that is why the question from the beginning of this story still remains without a clear answer. Was the progress really worth that much?